Welcome to Night Lesson. Relax and learn along the way. Intro: What Vesuvius preserved. Imagine an autumn morning in the Roman province of Campania in the year 79 AD. The air is already cooler than in the long, hot summer months. A gentle haze hangs over the Bay of Naples, and the first rays of sun bathe the slopes of the great, green mountain in a golden light. This mountain, which the people call Vesuvius, is a peaceful giant. Its flanks are covered with lush grapevines and dense forests. It watches over the bustling city at its feet, a city named Pompeii. Down below, in the cobbled streets, life is beginning. It is a morning like any other. From the open doors of the bakeries, the pastrina, flows the warm, comforting scent of freshly baked bread. A baker, his face dusted with flour, uses a long wooden peel to pull round, flat loaves from the brick oven. Each loaf bears the stamp of its maker, a small sign of pride in his work. On the street, heavy wooden carts rumble along, their iron wheels having carved deep ruts into the basalt stones of the Via dell'Abbondanza. Merchants hawk their wares, fresh fish from the nearby sea, juicy figs, pomegranates, and olives from the surrounding groves. In the courtyards of the grand villas, the domus, you can hear the splashing of fountains. A wealthy patrician woman, dressed in a fine tunic, gives her slaves instructions for the day. The walls behind her are painted with vibrant frescoes, scenes from mythology, delicate birds flying between painted columns, and gardens so lifelike you feel you can almost smell the flowers. In a narrower alley, children laugh as they chase a ball, while others play with small, polished bones in the shade of an awning, a game called tali. On the walls, people have left their marks. Scribbles, graffiti, proclaim political support, advertise gladiator games, or immortalize a secret declaration of love. Life pulses through every fiber of this city, home to some 11,000 souls. A completely normal day. But then, around noon, something happens. A sound that seems not of this world. It is not ordinary thunder. It is a deep, long rumbling that does not come from the sky, but seems to rise from the belly of the earth. The ground trembles slightly, barely noticeable, but enough to make the animals restless. People pause, their conversations fall silent. They look up, toward the peaceful green mountain, and they see its summit opening. A colossal column of smoke, ash, and glowing rock shoots miles high into the sky, spreading out to take the eerie shape of a giant pine tree, as an eyewitness would later describe. The sun darkens. Day turns to night. What follows is a catastrophe of unimaginable scale. Vesuvius, the benevolent guardian, becomes a merciless destroyer. In the hours that follow, it will bury Pompeii under a layer of pumice and hot ash many meters deep. It will silence forever the laughter of the children, the scent of bread, the splashing of the fountains. And yet, in this act of total destruction lies an incredible paradox. By annihilating Pompeii, Vesuvius preserved it. It did not burn the city like a fire that reduces everything to dust. It enveloped it, sealed it, put it into a deep sleep that would last for nearly 1,700 years. The deadly ash became a protective cocoon. It preserved that one final moment of life in all its detail, just as amber encases a prehistoric insect for eternity. Beneath this gray blanket, the city waited. It waited as the Roman Empire fell, as the Middle Ages came and went, as the Renaissance changed the world and new nations were born. Above it, grass grew again, then grapevines. New villages were built, and people slowly forgot that an entire city lay beneath their feet. It became a legend, a lost place known only as La Civita, the Old City, until the day the first explorers stumbled upon its walls by chance. And then, much later, came the archaeologists, not with pickaxes and shovels, but with fine brushes and the utmost care. They gently swept aside the dust of centuries and uncovered what the volcano had preserved. And what they found was not a ruin full of rubble and bones. They found life itself, frozen in motion. They found a pot of lentils still on the stove, ready for a lunch that was never eaten. They found 81 loaves of bread in an oven, charred to black carbon, but their shape perfectly preserved, each loaf round and divided into 8 wedges, just as was the custom. They found a surgeon's tools, laid out neatly on a cloth, as if he were waiting for his next patient. They found a pearl necklace that someone had tried to grab in the final moments. The colors on the walls were so fresh and vibrant, as if they had been painted only yesterday. The famous Pompeian red, the deep ochre yellow, the brilliant lapis lazuli blue. Mosaics on the floors told stories of heroes and gods, showed wild animals in astonishing detail, or bore the famous inscription Cave Canem, "Beware of the dog," at the entrance to a house. Even the most fleeting moments were preserved. The graffiti on the walls offered glimpses into the hearts and minds of the inhabitants. Gaius Plumidius Diphilus was here, someone wrote, leaving his simple existence for posterity. Another scratched a poem for a lover into the plaster. It is these tiny, human details that make Pompeii so unique. The shoes one took off before the door. The inkwell on a desk, a stylus beside it. The coins that fell from a purse and remained on the floor. Pompeii is a city suspended between worlds. A place of sudden, violent death, and at the same time, a place of infinite immortality. Nowhere else can we look so directly into the past, so immediately partake in the daily life of the Romans. Vesuvius took away the tomorrow of the people of Pompeii, but it gave their world an eternity. In the chapters to come, we will journey together. A journey back to this lost and rediscovered city. We will walk its silent streets, placing one foot in front of the other, exactly where a Roman walked almost 2,000 years ago. We will open the doors to the houses, enter the gardens, and discover the stories hidden in the stones, in the colors, and in the objects left behind. We will not focus only on the catastrophe, but above all on the life it preserved. We will admire the art of the fresco painters, understand the craft of the bakers and potters, and listen to the bustle of the forum, the heart of the city. We will visit the grand villas of the wealthy and the modest workshops of the common people. Every place has a story to tell, a quiet whisper from a time long past. This journey is an invitation to slow down time and look closely. It is a meditation on the fragility of life and the strange ways in which memory is preserved. Join me as we cross the threshold, from the present into a world that slept under the ash for nearly 2 millennia, just waiting to reveal its secrets. Our exploration begins behind the city gates, where the first step on the ancient pavement sounds like an echo from the past. Chapter 1: The City at the Foot of the Mountain. The first step on the ancient pavement is complete. Do you feel how the stone beneath your feet gives an uneven but firm response? It is not smooth, modern asphalt, but a mosaic of large, polygonal basalt slabs, called via munita by the Romans. Each slab was hewn by hand and fitted so precisely to the next that barely a gap remains between them. Over the centuries, countless footsteps and the wheels of heavy carts have polished the surface, giving it a dark, almost reflective patina. The joints are filled with smaller stones and compacted earth, and here and there, a tiny tuft of moss sprouts, a tenacious, green breath of life in a place that has been silent for so long. You lift your gaze and follow the course of the street. It is not wide, perhaps just enough for 2 approaching wagons, and it is lined with high curbs of volcanic rock. A fascinating feature immediately catches your eye. At regular intervals, massive, high-stepping stones, called pondera, jut out from the pavement. They form a kind of ancient crosswalk. Their function was as simple as it was ingenious. The streets of Pompeii served not only for traffic, but also for drainage. During heavy rain or when the public fountains overflowed, water flowed directly over the pavement. These stepping stones allowed pedestrians to cross the street with dry feet, while the wheels of ox carts fit perfectly into the gaps between them. If you look closely, you can see the deep ruts in the basalt, ground into the stone by the wheels over the centuries, a stone memory of the ceaseless pulse of commerce that kept this city alive. This was no sleepy provincial town. Pompeii, covering an area of about 66 hectares, of which about two-thirds have been excavated today, was a vibrant center for trade and craftsmanship. Its location on the Sarno River, which was navigable at the time, and its proximity to the sea made it an important hub. From here, the wine grown on the fertile slopes of Vesuvius was loaded into amphorae and shipped throughout the Roman Empire. Another, more famous specialty was garum, a fermented fish sauce considered a delicacy. The workshops of the garum producers, the officinae, exuded an intense, salty smell that mingled with the scent of freshly baked bread from the numerous bakeries and the earthy aroma of wool from the textile manufactories. As you walk on, you notice the walls lining the street. They are not bare. Everywhere you find traces of inscriptions, scribbles, and election appeals, the ancient echo of social media. Painted in red or black, they proclaim messages like, "Vote for Gaius Julius Polybius, he provides good bread," or simply personal notes like, "On May 15th, Hermeros relieved himself here." A particularly thoughtful inscription reads, "If anyone is not sitting here, let him read." These are the immediate, unfiltered voices of the common people, the artisans, the merchants, the slaves, reminding us that these walls were once filled with laughter, arguments, and the murmur of daily life. About every 80 meters, you come across a public fountain, fed by a sophisticated aqueduct that brought fresh water from the mountains into the city. The heavy lead and terracotta pipes ran under the pavement, supplying not only the fountains but also the public baths and the villas of the wealthy. The edge of the fountain basins is deeply grooved by the ropes with which residents lowered their water buckets over generations. It is easy to imagine neighbors meeting here, exchanging news, and taking a short break from their work as the cool water splashed into their jugs. The street now opens onto a wide, rectangular square surrounded by colonnades and monumental buildings, the Forum. This was the heart of Pompeii, the political, economic, and religious center. On the north side rises the majestic Temple of Jupiter, its steps offering a sublime view over the entire square to the mighty, green cone of Vesuvius in the background. Around the Forum crowded the most important buildings of the city: the Basilica, where justice was administered, the Market Hall, the Macellum, where fish and meat were sold, and the temples dedicated to Apollo and the imperial cult. Here, magistrates walked in their togas, merchants closed their deals, and citizens gathered to listen to the latest decrees. It was a place of order, power, and community. But the true social heart of the city beat in another place. We leave the formal expanse of the Forum and venture into the labyrinthine alleys leading to the baths, the Thermae. The public baths were far more than just a place to wash. They were the meeting point for everyone, regardless of social status. There were separate areas for men and women, each with an ingenious sequence of rooms heated by a hypocaust system, a kind of ancient underfloor heating where hot air circulated beneath the floors. One would begin in the apoditerium, the changing room with its niches for clothes, then move to the tepidarium, the warm room, to acclimatize before entering the caldarium, the hot steam room. The experience concluded with a dip in the frigidarium, the refreshing cold water pool. But the visit did not end there. The baths also included sports grounds, the palestra, libraries, and gardens. Here, people met friends, cultivated business contacts, trained their bodies, and relaxed their minds. On the edge of the city, slightly away from the center, lies a structure of immense proportions, the amphitheater. Built around 80 BC, it is the oldest surviving Roman stone amphitheater and could hold about 20,000 spectators, almost the entire population of Pompeii and the surrounding villages. Its oval arena is sunk into the ground, which gave it remarkable stability. Imagine the stands, filled with an expectant crowd watching the gladiator contests and animal hunts that took place here. It was a place of raw, loud entertainment, a release for the masses, but also an architectural masterpiece demonstrating the advanced engineering skills of the Romans. Who were the people who filled these streets and buildings with life? Society was strongly stratified. At the top were a few wealthy families who lived in magnificent villas with spacious atriums, elaborate mosaics, and brightly colored frescoes. The majority of the population, however, consisted of merchants, bakers, potters, and other artisans. A significant group were the freedmen, former slaves who often became successful business people. And then there were the slaves, who made up an estimated one-third of the population and worked in all areas of life, from the large estates in the countryside to the households of the rich. A visit to the so-called Lupanar, the city's most famous brothel, offers a glimpse into the less glamorous aspects of daily life. It is a small, two-story building with narrow chambers containing stone beds. Above the doorways of the rooms are explicit wall paintings, possibly depicting the specialties of the respective resident. It is a direct, unvarnished look at a facet of Roman life often unmentioned in official history books. As we wander through the alleys, it is important to remember that in the year 79 AD, the city still bore the scars of a previous catastrophe. A severe earthquake had shaken Pompeii in 62, destroying large parts of it. 17 years later, reconstruction work was still in full swing. Everywhere, unfinished repairs, building materials, and stacked bricks testify to a community in the process of healing and rebuilding. It adds another layer of fragility to the city, an inkling of how resilient and yet vulnerable this life at the foot of the mountain was. The sun slowly dips toward the horizon, bathing the ochre-colored walls and the dark pavement in a warm, golden light. The long shadows of the forum's columns stretch across the empty square. The noise of the day that once echoed from these walls has long faded, replaced by a profound silence. We leave the public squares and the busy main streets behind and turn into a narrower side alley. Here, away from the hustle and bustle, an open door leads into the dark entrance of a house. It is an invitation to cross the threshold and take a look into the private world, into the heart of a Pompeian home, where the stories of families unfolded. Chapter 2. The Signs That No One Read. What did the people feel within the walls of this house, in the weeks and months that preceded the end? What quiet premonitions might have crept into their hearts in the silent hours of the night, only to be chased away again by the light of the busy morning? For the signs were there. They were not written in fiery letters across the sky, but whispered softly from the earth, from the water, and from the air. But no one understood their language. The great mountain that watched over the Bay of Naples was not a demon to them, not a sleeping threat. It was a gift. They called it Vesuvius, and it was the heart of their fertility. Its slopes, covered with deep green grapevines, produced one of the most sought-after wines of the Roman Empire. Villas and farmsteads clung to its flanks, their inhabitants breathing the pure mountain air and enjoying the breathtaking view over the sapphire blue sea. The summit itself, much higher then than it is today, perhaps towering to 2,000 meters, held a wide, bowl-shaped depression. A strange place, certainly, but people saw it as just a whim of nature. They saw the lush forest that grew into the caldera and the goats that grazed on the steep inner walls. No one was alive who could remember a time when the mountain had spewed fire and ash. The last major eruption, the colossal catastrophe that archaeologists today call the Avellino eruption, had occurred almost 2,000 years earlier. An unimaginably long time, a chasm that no oral tradition, no myth, and no legend could bridge. The memory was buried as deeply beneath the earth and time as the Bronze Age villages that had been destroyed back then. The mountain had slept for so long that humanity had forgotten it could sleep at all. It was just a mountain. But it began to stir in ways that were subtle and confusing. The springs, which had provided clear, cool water for generations, began to run dry. At the public fountains, the meeting places of the neighborhood, the wait grew longer. The water that trickled from the bronze lion heads became less. In the private atriums of the houses, where the splashing of fountains had once provided a constant, soothing melody, an unaccustomed silence now often reigned. It was worse at the wells that reached deeper into the earth. Their water acquired a strange, sharp aftertaste. A smell reminiscent of the sulfur baths in nearby Baiae rose from the depths. People shook their heads, cleaned the wells, blamed the gods or some contamination, but the foul smell remained. It was the breath of magma rising deep beneath the earth's crust, forcing gases up through fissures in the rock. A chemical telegram from the underworld, whose code no one knew. The animals sensed it too. Birds behaved strangely, gathering in restless flocks and falling abruptly silent. The sheep and goats on the slopes of Vesuvius became nervous, barely ate, and huddled together in panic for no apparent reason. In the city stables, horses neighed at night, and in the courtyards of the villas, dogs whined softly and persistently, their gaze fixed on the mountain's motionless peak. Their instincts screamed a warning that their human masters could not hear. Then came the great earthquake. On February 5th of the year 62 AD, the entire region of Campania trembled. It was not a light tremor, but a massive, destructive jolt. In Pompeii, temples collapsed, statues fell from their pedestals, and the walls of thousands of houses developed deep cracks or crumbled completely. Nearly 60% of the city lay in ruins. It was a disaster that shook the people to their core. But they misinterpreted it. They saw it as an outburst of the god's anger, perhaps Neptune's, the earth shaker. No one connected the earthquake with the silent, green mountain. In the 17 years that followed, Pompeii was rebuilt with admirable tenacity. At the time of our visit in the autumn of the year 79, the city is still a construction site. Everywhere you see scaffolding, hear the hammering, smell the dust of mortar and fresh plaster. The Pompeians had chosen to stay, to rebuild their home. They had seen the earthquake as a terrible but finished trial of fate. In the final days before the eruption, the trembling of the earth became more frequent again. They were only light tremors, a rumbling that would barely spill a cup of wine on the table. People had grown used to it. The earth in this region had always been restless. They would shrug, say a quick prayer, and go about their business. These small quakes were merely the creaking in the mountain's frame, the sound of a crust beginning to fracture under the unimaginable pressure from below. There had even been scholars who had been on the trail of the mountain's secret without knowing it. Decades earlier, the Greek geographer Strabo had described Vesuvius. In his writings, he noted that the summit crater looked rocky and barren, with rock that seemed as if eaten by fire. He correctly speculated that the mountain must have burned once. But his observation remained an academic footnote, a curiosity for scholars, with no relevance to the wine growers on the slopes or the merchants in the city. On that fateful morning, about 30 kilometers west of Pompeii, on the other side of the bay, stood a man whose life was dedicated to observing nature. Gaius Plinius Secundus, known today as Pliny the Elder, was not only the commander of the Roman fleet stationed at Misenum, but also one of the greatest polymaths of his time. A man of insatiable curiosity, he was currently working on his monumental encyclopedia, the Naturalis Historia, a work in 37 volumes intended to encompass all the world's knowledge. We can imagine him sitting in his study after lunch, perhaps giving a lesson to his nephew, the young Gaius Plinius. His gaze wandered out the window, across the glittering water of the bay, over to the majestic profile of Vesuvius. And there, above the summit, he saw something he had never seen before. A cloud of unusual shape and size was rising into the clear sky. It looked, as his nephew would later write in a letter to the historian Tacitus, like a giant pine tree. A long, dark trunk that spread out at a great height into a sprawling, flat crown. For a moment, it was merely a fascinating natural spectacle for the tireless researcher. The scientist's curiosity triumphed over any inkling of danger. He did not suspect that he was witnessing the first act of a tragedy, and that this cloud was the curtain that was about to fall on an entire world. Chapter 3, 18 Hours. How does it feel when a mountain begins to breathe? Around noon, shortly after the midday rest, Vesuvius answered this unspoken question. It did not begin with fire, not with a loud crash, but with a deep, rumbling thunder that seemed to come not from the sky, but from the heart of the earth. A sound that traveled up through the soles of sandals and into the bones, making the very air vibrate. Then, with unimaginable force, the pressure broke through the volcano's clogged throat. A colossal column of gas, ash, and pulverized rock shot miles into the sky. Up in the thinner air of the stratosphere, it spread out, taking a shape that would later be described as uncannily accurate. About 30 kilometers away, at the Cape of Misenum, Pliny the Elder already had his pen in hand. He reached for his writing tablets and had his secretaries record his observations. The phenomenon he described, a column rising for miles, spreading into a pine tree-like canopy in the stratosphere, is known today as a Plinian eruption, named after the man who first documented it scientifically, never suspecting that he himself would be added to the list of its victims. For the people of Pompeii, the perspective was different. The sky above them darkened as the enormous canopy of the eruption cloud blotted out the sun, and then it began to rain. Not water, but light, porous stones. Pumice. At first, they were just small pebbles, clattering on the tiled roofs and the pavement. A strange, almost harmless sound. Children may have held out their hands to catch the odd, gray flakes, which were so light they could float on water. But the rain grew heavier. The stones got bigger, some as large as a fist. Initial curiosity gave way to concern, then to fear. The sky was now a ceaselessly falling stream of rock. 15 to 20 centimeters of this material fell on the city every hour. A relentless burial in slow motion. In these first hours, an invisible line was drawn through the population. On one side were those who had the instinct to flee. They left everything behind, grabbed their children, perhaps hastily barricaded their doors, and ran. They ran through the city gates, out onto the country roads, away from the mountain that was turning day into night. Most of them, it is estimated today, survived. They never saw their home again, but they lived. On the other side of the line were those who stayed. Their reasons were varied and deeply human. Some believed it was just a temporary shower that could be weathered inside their sturdy stone houses. Others did not want to leave their valuables behind. The gold, the silver, the heirlooms that were the result of a lifetime's work. They barricaded themselves in cellars and under stairs, their heads protected with pillows, and waited for the stone rain to subside. They waited in vain. The hours passed. Night fell, but there was no longer any difference from the darkness of the day. The city was suffocating under an ever-thickening blanket of pumice. The layer was now over a meter thick. Then the cracking began. The ominous sound of breaking wooden beams. The flat roofs of the Roman houses, designed to collect rainwater, were not built for this load. One by one, they gave way under the relentless weight. Entire roofs collapsed, burying those who had sought shelter beneath them. The earth shook again and again, further tremors from within the volcano, causing the already weakened structures of the city to collapse completely. In Misenum, Pliny the Elder had made a decision. His scientific curiosity had turned into a desire to help. He had a fleet of fast ships ready to evacuate the people on the coast. He set sail, straight into the danger, and landed at Stabii, south of Pompeii. He spent the night there, trying to calm the frightened people with his stoic composure. But the next morning, as he tried to return to the shore to escape, he was overcome by the toxic gases that followed the eruption. The great scholar died on the beach, a victim of his courage and his thirst for knowledge. While Pliny was taking his last breath in Stabii, Vesuvius was preparing its final, deadliest act. The enormous eruption column, which had stood stable in the sky for hours, an eruption of magnitude 5 on the volcanic explosivity index, comparable to the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens, lost its strength. It collapsed in on itself and unleashed hell. What happened next was no longer rain. It was an avalanche, a pyroclastic surge, a scorching cloud of ash, gas, and rock fragments that raced down the slopes of the volcano at the speed of a race car. This was not the slower, denser pyroclastic flow, but a surge, a more turbulent, gas-rich cloud that instantly incinerated everything in its path. The first of these waves had already hit the nearby town of Herculaneum around midnight. With temperatures of 500 to 700 degrees Celsius, it was so hot that it instantly carbonized organic material. Death came faster than a thought. Around 6 o'clock in the morning, in the ghostly dawn barely perceptible through the thick layer of ash, the first of a total of 6 documented surges reached Pompeii. It had cooled slightly due to the distance from the volcano, but was still between 300 and 500 degrees Celsius. It swept over the layer of pumice that already covered the city, penetrating every open window, every door, every remaining shelter. For the few who had survived the collapsing roofs and the night, there was no escape. The heat scorched the lungs with the first breath. The fine ash filled every space, suffocating any remaining life. Anyone still trying to flee now was overrun by the cloud. Wave after wave poured over the plain, burying Pompeii for good. In total, about 1.5 cubic kilometers of material were ejected, enough to make the city disappear under a 4 to 6 meter thick layer of pumice and ash. Then, after nearly 18 hours of continuous violence, Vesuvius fell silent. The stone rain had stopped. The glowing avalanches had come to a halt. An eerie silence settled over the landscape. Where once a thriving city with vineyards, bustling streets, and laughing people had stood, there was now a gray, hilly desert under an ash-laden sky. Beneath this blanket, protected from the decay of time, lay Pompeii, not destroyed, but preserved. A frozen moment of panic and daily life, waiting for the world to forget it before, one distant day, finding it again. The 18 hours of the eruption were over. The silence of the centuries had just begun. Chapter 4. The Faces of the Dead. What is left behind when time itself lies buried under ash? Not just mosaics and walls, not just amphorae and frescoes. Sometimes, a void is left behind. A hollow space, shaped by a life that was extinguished in a single moment. For almost 1,800 years, these voids were Pompeii's best-kept secret. The excavators of the 18th and early 19th centuries repeatedly came across them without understanding their true significance. They found brittle bones in strange cavities deep within the hardened ash layer, but the shape, the contour of a body, was lost forever. They recovered the skeletons, and the empty form disintegrated, a fleeting ghost that blew away with the first gust of wind. But it was one man who would change everything, Giuseppe Fiorelli. He had taken over the direction of the excavations in 1860, a man of system and sharp intellect. In 1863, he made an observation that would shake the world of archaeology. He noticed these strange, empty spaces in the rock. He understood what lay before him. When the pyroclastic surges engulfed the city, they had enveloped the people and animals where they fell. The fine, hot ash and pumice settled around them like a cloak and solidified into a dense, cement-like layer. Inside this stone cocoon, the organic material decomposed over the centuries. The bodies vanished, but their form, the exact impression of their final moment remained. A negative image of life, preserved in volcanic rock. Fiorelli had an idea that was as simple as it was brilliant. Instead of destroying these voids to get to the bones inside, he decided to fill them. His workers carefully drilled small holes into the hardened ash layer until they hit such a cavity. Then, they mixed liquid plaster, a fine, white plaster of Paris, and poured it slowly and deliberately into the opening. They filled the void that a human being had left behind. The plaster seeped into every tiny fold of clothing, into the outlines of fingers, into the curve of a cheek. It filled the space that a breathing body had once occupied. After the plaster had hardened, the surrounding ash layer was carefully removed. And for the first time since the year 79 AD, the world looked once again into the faces of the dead of Pompeii. They were no longer skeletons, no longer anonymous piles of bones. They were people. The plaster cast showed them in their last, desperate poses. There is a woman, lying on her stomach, covering her face with a cloth or her arms, as if to block out the sight of the inevitable. You can almost feel the tension in her shoulders. There is a man lying on the ground, his mouth slightly open, perhaps in a final scream or a last breath. His hands are clenched into fists, a silent testament to the struggle against an overwhelming force of nature. In total, over the years, about 100 of these moving casts were created. Many of them are now on display in the National Archaeological Museum in Naples, silent witnesses to a lost world. Fiorelli's method became the standard and is still used today, though sometimes with more modern materials like transparent resin, which allows a view of the bones inside. One of the most impressive find spots is the so-called Garden of the Fugitives. Here, in an orchard near the Nocera Gate, a group of 13 people was found. An entire family, adults and children, who were trying to escape the city together. They had almost made it. But the final, deadly cloud of gas and ash caught up with them. The casts show them huddled together on the ground. A snapshot of a group that stayed together until the very last moment. They had tried to sneak through the garden, away from the collapsing roofs of the streets, but the mountain left them no way out. In recent years, science has brought us even closer to these people. Using computed tomography, the same CT scans used in modern medicine, researchers can now see inside the plaster casts. They no longer need to break them open to uncover the secrets within. The scans reveal the skeletons enclosed in the plaster. One can see the bone structure, determine the person's age, and sometimes even identify diseases or injuries they had in life. The teeth of the Pompeians, these scans show, were surprisingly healthy. Cavities were rare. This was due to their diet, which contained hardly any refined sugar, but also to the high fluoride content in the local water, which came from the volcanic soils. A small detail that tells us so much about their daily life. In one of the casts, the so-called rich man, not only bones were discovered. Inside, where his pouch must have been, the scans found the outlines of a small sack of coins and a set of keys. He was likely a wealthy merchant or landowner who had stayed in the city too long, hoping to save his property. His wealth could not protect him from the wrath of Vesuvius. These techniques tell us not only about death, but also about life. They give an identity back to the nameless victims. They show us that not only did a tragedy occur here, but that individuals lived here, with hopes, families, and a social status. Names and deeds, carved in stone and painted in frescoes, attest to the important role that women could play in the social fabric of Pompeii. Science continues to advance our knowledge of the victims. In 2021, an international research team analyzed the complete DNA sequence of a victim from Pompeii for the first time. The results paint a picture of a multi-ethnic, cosmopolitan society. The genetic traces point to ancestors from all over the Mediterranean, from the Italian peninsula to the Middle East. Pompeii was not an isolated place, but a melting pot of cultures, a bustling hub in the Roman Empire. Perhaps the most moving story modern science tells us is that of the so-called two maidens, or Lakopia, the loving couple. Two figures lying close together, one protectively resting its head on the other's chest. For a long time, it was assumed they were two women or a man and a woman in a final embrace. But a DNA analysis in 2022 brought a different truth to light. They were two men, and the analysis of their DNA showed they were closely related biologically. Perhaps an uncle and his nephew, perhaps two brothers, or a father and son. They were not lovers in a romantic sense, but family, comforting each other in their final moments. They did not give up on each other. Thus, the faces of the dead tell us far more than just the story of their end. They tell of the diversity of life, of family bonds, of health and social order. Each plaster cast is a silent archive, a frozen life that, through the curiosity and ingenuity of later generations, is slowly beginning to speak to us again. They are the silent ambassadors of their time, reminding us across the centuries that beneath the ash, not just a city, but a whole world of people is waiting to be understood. Their stories are far from over. Chapter 5, Herculaneum, the Other City. Can a breath of wind decide the fate of thousands? On that October day in the year 79, the wind blew from the northwest, a meteorological fact so ordinary and yet so consequential. As it carried the deadly ash cloud of Vesuvius inland and southeast, directly over the roofs of Pompeii, it initially left another city, closer to the fire-breathing peak, almost untouched. This city was Herculaneum, Pompeii's smaller, wealthier sister. Herculaneum was a jewel on the coast, a place where the Roman elite built their magnificent villas overlooking the Bay of Naples. With only about 4,000 to 5,000 inhabitants, it was more of an exclusive resort than a bustling commercial town. Its streets were quieter, its houses more opulent, and its location directly on the slope of Vesuvius should have made it the first victim of the eruption. But on that afternoon, fate seemed to favor the city. The sky over Herculaneum remained relatively clear. The colossal eruption column did darken the sun, and the ground trembled ceaselessly, but the devastating rain of pumice and ash that was already beginning to suffocate Pompeii did not fall here. The inhabitants of Herculaneum had time. Time to watch the disaster on the horizon, time to recognize the danger, and time to make a decision. And most of them made the only sensible one. They fled. They packed their most valuable possessions, gathered their families, and left the city, probably overland, away from the rumbling mountain whose wrath was unfolding before their eyes. For many hours, it seemed as if Herculaneum was the lucky city that had been spared. For centuries, archaeologists believed that almost all the inhabitants had escaped, as hardly any human remains were found in the upper layers of the excavated city. It was a comforting thought, a glimmer of hope amid the tragedy. But the whole truth lay hidden deeper, at the edge of the ancient sea. Shortly after midnight, everything changed. The immense eruption column, which had shot miles into the stratosphere, lost its buoyancy. It collapsed under its own weight, sending an avalanche of superheated gas, ash, and rock fragments down the flanks of the volcano. This was no longer a rain of ash. It was a pyroclastic surge, a glowing cloud that raced towards Herculaneum at the speed of a race car. Imagine this wave, an invisible front of heat, followed by a suffocating, pitch-black wall of swirling matter. It hit the city with unimaginable force. The temperature in this surge was around 700 degrees Celsius, more than twice the temperature at which lead melts. In the houses of Herculaneum, archaeologists later found lead pipes that had melted into liquid puddles and then solidified again, silent witnesses to the infernal heat that consumed everything in an instant. For any living thing still in the city, there was no escape. Death was instantaneous, and there were people who had stayed behind, not in the houses of the city, but down on the beach. In the 1980s, archaeologists made a discovery that would change the image of Herculaneum forever. In the vaulted boathouses, the so-called fornaci, which were built directly into the waterfront, they found the remains of about 300 people. Here, in the futile hope of rescue by boats that would never arrive in the turbulent sea, they had sought shelter. Families, huddled close together, men, women, and children, staring out at the sea, waiting for a rescue, while death swept over them from behind. Unlike in Pompeii, there are no plaster casts in Herculaneum. The extreme heat of the pyroclastic surge did not allow the bodies to decompose slowly and leave a void. It vaporized the flesh and soft tissues in a fraction of a second, leaving only the bones. These skeletons, perfectly preserved in the fine volcanic mud that sealed the city, are an invaluable archive. They tell us about the people's diet, their diseases, and their origins. They give the victims a physical presence that is more harrowing than any plaster cast. The reconstruction of the events on that beach is painfully clear. The temperature of the now slightly cooled gas cloud that reached the boathouses was still between 500 and 600 degrees. Death from thermal shock was so immediate that the victims' muscles instantly seized, and their bones remained in the positions in which they had spent the last moment of their lives. But the same destructive force that extinguished these lives also led to a unique form of preservation. While in Pompeii organic material like wood and fabric almost completely rotted away, the sudden, oxygen-deprived heat in Herculaneum did something different. It carbonized it. Wood did not burn to ash, it turned into charcoal. As archaeologists dug through the up to 20-meter thick, concrete-hard layer of mud and ash, 4 times deeper than in Pompeii, they found a world preserved in detail. They found wooden doors still hanging on their hinges, intricately decorated furniture, beds with intact frames, and even wooden partitions inside the houses. A fishing boat was found almost unscathed on the ancient beach, its ropes still lying beside it. In a bakery, a loaf of bread was discovered, perfect in its form, black and hard as stone, but with the baker's mark still clearly visible. These objects allow us a much more intimate and detailed look into the daily life of the Romans than the empty voids of Pompeii ever could. Herculaneum is not the city of imprints, but the city of substance. And perhaps the greatest substance, the most precious treasure that survived here, is knowledge itself. In a magnificent villa on the edge of the city, the so-called Villa dei Papyri, an entire library was discovered. Nearly 1,800 papyrus scrolls, neatly stored on shelves, were engulfed by the heat wave and baked into charred, fragile cylinders. For almost 2 millennia, they were considered unreadable, a vast reservoir of lost knowledge, sealed and forever silent. But human curiosity never gives up. Recently, in 2023, scientists achieved a breakthrough as part of the Vesuvius Challenge. Using artificial intelligence and high-resolution computed tomography scans, they were able to virtually unroll the charred scrolls and make visible the subtle differences in density between the papyrus and the ink. And then, after countless attempts, the first word appeared from inside one of these scrolls, a word that no one had read since the year 79, the Greek word for purple. A single word, but it is the key to an entire library. The texts that are slowly coming to light likely deal with Epicurean philosophy and music theory, thoughts and ideas that have slumbered in darkness for 2,000 years. The voices of Herculaneum, silenced on that terrible evening, are beginning to speak to us again. They tell not only of their end, but also of their lives, their art, and their search for understanding the world. The other city has its own stories, and we are only just beginning to listen. Chapter 6: The Rebirth, Excavation, and Discovery. How does a story begin anew after being silent for nearly 17 centuries? It does not begin with a bang, but with the quiet scrape of a shovel, with the accidental clink of metal on stone. It begins as a rumor, a whisper among farmers and laborers who, while digging wells or plowing their fields, came across strange walls, colorful little stones, and old coins. For a long, long time, these finds were just curiosities, scattered echoes of a forgotten world. But in the 18th century, during the Age of Enlightenment and the Grand Tour of Europe, interest in antiquity grew into a true passion. The rediscovery began not in Pompeii, but in its sister city, Herculaneum. From 1738, the King of Naples, Charles III of the House of Bourbon, had excavations carried out there. But this was not a scientific investigation in the modern sense. It was a treasure hunt. Workers, often conscripted prisoners, drove narrow, dark tunnels through the rock-hard volcanic material. They worked like miners, following the lines of walls, breaking through them, and searching the buried villas for anything that seemed valuable: statues of marble and bronze, jewelry, fine tableware. What was not considered a work of art or a treasure was often carelessly left behind or destroyed in the search for the next prize. Entire frescoes were cut from the walls to decorate the king's palaces, while the architectural context, the story of the space, was lost forever. It was a ruthless plundering, driven by the greed for prestige and beauty. 10 years later, in 1748, the focus shifted. A gardener planting a vineyard came across masonry and a handful of ancient coins. This time, it was Pompeii. The layer of lapilli and ash was softer here, the excavation easier. And so the official search began here as well. The first decades of excavation in Pompeii followed the same pattern as in Herculaneum, a hasty, uncoordinated digging for treasures. The city was not seen as a whole, as a living organism that needed to be preserved, but as a mine whose riches were to be extracted. But slowly, a new awareness began to stir. Scholars and artists visited the sites and were fascinated. In 1764, the German art historian Johann Joachim Winckelmann published the first art historical report on the finds, laying the foundation for archaeology as an independent science. He criticized the unsystematic methods and called for a more respectful handling of the remains. The poet Johann Wolfgang von Goethe was also deeply impressed when he wandered through the excavated streets in 1787. He wrote in his diary the famous, thoughtful sentence, "Of all the calamities that have befallen the world, few have brought so much joy to posterity." He recognized that the catastrophe that had extinguished life had also preserved that very life for a distant future. The true revolution in the archaeology of Pompeii, however, came a century later, with a man named Giuseppe Fiorelli. When he took over the direction of the excavations in 1860, he ended the era of tunneling and treasure hunting. Fiorelli understood that the real treasure was not the individual statue or the golden bracelet, but the context, the information of where and how something was found. He introduced a radically new method. Instead of digging tunnels, he had the city uncovered from above, layer by layer, just as it had once been buried. Every single find, be it a simple potsherd or a precious mosaic, was left in place, documented, drawn, and photographed before being recovered. He understood that the arrangement of things told a story, the story of the final moments. Fiorelli also created a system that still forms the basis for orientation in the city today. He divided the entire area into 9 districts or regions. Each district was further subdivided into housing blocks, the insulae, and every single house was given its own number. Thus, every find could be precisely located. Regio I, Insula 2, house number 3. Suddenly, Pompeii was no longer a chaotic collection of ruins, but an orderly, readable city plan. With this method, archaeology was transformed from a treasure hunt into a meticulous science. The 20th century brought new techniques and new challenges. Motorized machinery accelerated the excavations, especially under the long direction of Amedeo Maiuri, who shaped the work for nearly 40 years from 1924 to 1961. During this time, vast parts of the city were uncovered. Mayuri's ambition was to bring as much of Pompeii back to light as possible, but this speed had its price. Often, the digging was too fast, and valuable information about the layers and context was lost. Furthermore, a new, enormous problem revealed itself. As soon as the ancient buildings were exposed to air, rain, and sunlight, they began to decay. The frescoes faded, the walls crumbled. The greatest challenge was no longer excavation, but conservation. Added to this was the growing stream of visitors, which placed additional strain on the fragile ruins. Today, Pompeii is one of the most visited archaeological sites in the world. Every year, around 3.5 million people wander through its ancient streets and look into its silent houses. The site was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1997, a recognition of its unique importance to all of humanity. To halt the progressive decay and secure the future of the ruins, the Great Pompeii Project was launched from 2012 to 2023. With a budget of €105 million, crumbling walls were secured, fading frescoes were restored, and new, more gentle research methods were developed. And the discoveries continue. Of the total 66 hectares of the ancient city, about 44 hectares have been excavated to date. A full third, 22 hectares, still lies untouched beneath the earth, a silent archive awaiting its opening. Since 2017, new excavations have focused on a previously unexplored part, Regio V. And what has come to light there has once again astonished the world. A bakery was found with an intact oven, in which the outlines of petrified loaves of bread were visible. A house was discovered with a breathtaking fresco depicting the mythological scene of Leda and the swan in brilliant colors. In a stable, the remains of a noble horse were found, complete with saddle and bronze bridle, ready for an escape that never happened. And in a small box, a tiny amethyst was found, a gem into which the portrait of a woman was carved, who reminds us with a startling resemblance to the elves from modern fantasy stories. Each of these discoveries is like a new word in a sentence that was interrupted almost 2,000 years ago. They refine our picture of life in Pompeii, add details, correct old assumptions, and ask new questions. The rebirth of the city is not a completed process. It happens every day, with every shovel of earth carefully removed, with every new technology that allows us to look deeper and more accurately into the past. And so, a third of the city still lies hidden, a silent promise to the future. There, under the pine trees and the fertile soil, more houses, more gardens, and more lives are waiting to tell their stories when the time is right. Chapter 7. What Pompeii reveals to us. Every object lifted from the ash is more than just an artifact. It is a whisper from a time long past, a fragment of an interrupted conversation. Pompeii is not a ruin in the conventional sense. It is a pause button that was pressed on an autumn day in the year 79 AD. The city froze, and in that state of suspension lies its inestimable value. It is a time capsule that tells us not only of emperors and generals, but of the pulse of daily life, the smell of the kitchen, the scribbles on the wall, the worries and joys of ordinary people. Let's imagine we are walking through one of the excavated alleys, past the stepping stones that cross the street. The air no longer smells of freshly baked bread or savory stew, but the traces of them are everywhere. Over 80 so-called thermopolia have been found in Pompeii, the fast food restaurants of antiquity. They were open counters facing the street, often artfully decorated with frescoes depicting chickens, ducks, or wine jugs, a kind of illustrated menu. Set into these counters were large earthenware jars, the dolia, in which food was kept warm. When archaeologists uncovered the completely preserved thermopolium of Herculaneum in 2020, they found the remains of the last meal in these pots. DNA analysis revealed an astonishing variety: remnants of pork, fish, snails, and even dog meat, seasoned with herbs and prepared as a kind of paella. It was the food of the street, quick, nutritious, and accessible to everyone. Not far from such a cook shop might lie one of the 35 identified bakeries. In one of them, archaeologists made a particularly poignant discovery. In the large, dome-shaped oven still stood 81 loaves of bread. The heat of the volcanic eruption had turned them to charcoal, but their shape was perfectly preserved. Round, flat loaves, pre-scored into 8 even segments before baking to make them easier to break. One can almost picture the baker on that morning, kneading the dough, stoking the ovens, unaware that his final work would endure for centuries without ever being eaten. On the tables and in the pantries of the houses, charred figs, dates, grains, and amphorae were found, once filled with wine or the ubiquitous garum, that salty, intense fish sauce that was to the Romans what ketchup or soy sauce might be to us today. But the Pompeians left behind not only traces of their food, but also of their thoughts, their feelings, and their voices. Over 11,000 graffiti have been found on the city's walls, a priceless collection catalogued in the Corpus Inscriptionum Latinarum. These inscriptions are the social network of antiquity, scratched into the plastered walls with a nail or painted with charcoal. They give us an unfiltered insight into society. There are the political messages, the election appeals for a candidate. I ask you, vote for Gaius Julius Polybius, he bakes good bread. Behind this name is a wealthy candidate who lived in one of the most beautiful houses in the city, surrounded by a magnificent garden. Next to these are commercial notes, the price list of a tavern. For 1 as, you get wine. For 2, you get better. For 4, you get Falernian wine. And then there are the countless personal messages, the declarations of love and the insults. Successus, the weaver, loves the slave girl Iris, but she does not care for him, laments an anonymous writer. Another proudly proclaims, "The 2 of us drank here, me and my brother." Even literary quotes are found, a line from Virgil's Aeneid, scrawled on the wall of a basilica. This graffiti is written in vulgar Latin, the spoken language of the people, not the polished Latin of poets and senators. It is the language from which the Romance languages like Italian and French would later emerge. On some older walls, traces of Oscan, the language spoken in the region before the Roman conquest, can still be found. Pompeii thus also documents the transition of a linguistic era. When the walls were not written on, they were often painted. The frescoes of Pompeii are windows into the Roman soul. In the villas of the wealthy, they tell of the gods and heroes of Greek mythology, a sign of education and status. In other rooms, they show scenes from daily life, bustling activity in the forum, a lavish banquet, gladiators in combat. And yes, there are also the famous erotic depictions, especially in the Lupanar, the city's brothel. To us today, they may seem shocking, but for the Romans, they were often part of a more uninhibited view of the world, sometimes humorous, sometimes perhaps even intended as amulets to ward off evil. These detailed insights extend to all areas of life. In the so-called House of the Surgeon, a case of bronze medical instruments was found, strikingly similar to modern ones: scalpels, forceps, probes, and even a catheter. They attest to an advanced medical knowledge and craftsmanship. Coin finds in the ruins help archaeologists to date the layers precisely. A purse full of coins minted under Emperor Nero proves that the house where it was found was still inhabited or was rebuilt after the Great Earthquake of 62 AD. Through these finds, we can even reconstruct the economy and prices. A loaf of bread might have cost 1 as, a tunic 15 sesterces. A simple legionary or a carpenter earned about 3 sesterces a day. Life was expensive, and daily life was defined by work. And contrary to many popular beliefs, this was not a purely male world. Inscriptions and frescoes testify to the important role of women. One of the most prominent citizens was Eumacheia, a priestess and businesswoman who donated a large public building in the Forum. Wall paintings show women as merchants selling their goods in the market, or as scholars, reading and writing. They were part of public and economic life, their traces just as deeply imprinted in the ash. All this knowledge, this incredible wealth of detail, comes from the 2/3 of the city that has been excavated so far. But what about the rest? About 22 hectares of Pompeii still sleep beneath the earth, a vast, untouched area. Every detail we know only shines a brighter light on what we do not know. What stories are still hidden in the undiscovered villas, the still buried workshops, and the still silent gardens? The voices from those 22 hectares, which still rest, have not yet begun their telling. They wait, patiently, under the earth, for the day when they too will open their windows to the past and reveal even more about who we once were. Outro, the city that never died. And the mountain? Vesuvius, which first sealed these windows to the past, is only sleeping. Its silence is not an end, but a pause. Anyone who stands on the Bay of Naples today and looks up at its summit sees not just a picturesque backdrop, but one of the most closely monitored volcanoes in the world. Its breath is still there, palpable in the fumaroles that quietly release vapors into the sky, measurable in the fine vibrations of the ground recorded by sensitive seismographs. Vesuvius is not history, it is the present. Its last major eruption occurred in 1944, in the midst of the chaos of the Second World War. American bomber squadrons stationed at a nearby airfield suddenly faced an enemy that could not be fought with weapons. Ash and lapilli rained down on the aircraft, a surreal scene in which modern war machinery capitulated to the archaic power of the earth. Geologists agree, Vesuvius will erupt again. The question is not if, but when. And in this knowledge lies a deep humility, an acknowledgement of cycles that far exceed the human scale. The people who live in the cities on its slopes today do so in the shadow of a latent but ever-present power, just like their ancient ancestors. This realization has also changed the way we view Pompeii itself. The city has not been fully excavated. An entire third, over 20 hectares, still lies beneath the blanket of ash and pumice that buried it almost 2,000 years ago. This is not negligence or a lack of resources, but a conscious, far-sighted decision. The archaeologists of today know that their methods, as advanced as they may seem, will one day be obsolete. They deliberately leave this part of the heritage for future generations. They are saving these untouched streets and houses for a time when new technologies may make it possible to uncover the past even more gently, more completely. Imagine what still awaits there. Perhaps there will be instruments that can see through the ash without moving a single stone. Perhaps they can read the last thoughts locked in the charred papyrus scrolls of the libraries, or reconstruct the colors of frescoes that would fade forever with the mere touch of air. This untouched third is not an oversight. It is a message of hope and trust in the future. It is the promise that the story of Pompeii is not yet fully told. What this city has given us in the meantime, however, is of inestimable value. It is something that the majestic ruins of Rome often withhold from us. Rome shows us the empire, the power, the monuments. The Colosseum tells of spectacles, the Forum of politics, the triumphal arches of victorious generals. But Pompeii gives us the Romans. It shows us not the emperors and senators in marble, but the people in their daily lives. It leads us away from the abstract idea of a world empire and toward the concrete life of an individual. As we walk through the streets, we meet them. We enter the house of Gaius Julius Polybius, a wealthy man who ran for political office, as the election slogans on his outer walls still proclaim today. We see the remains of his garden, can imagine him sitting here with his family, surrounded by the scent of herbs and the quiet splashing of a fountain. We stand before the magnificent building of whose name we already know, a silent testament to a life full of ambition and prestige, to the visible role that women in this city could play. And then there is Pliny the Younger, the young man who watched from a distance as the world of his childhood perished, and who recorded the catastrophe for posterity in his letters to the historian Tacitus. His words are the bridge that takes us directly into those hours. He was not an abstract chronicler, but a survivor who mourned the loss of his uncle and tried to put the incomprehensible into words. Through him, we feel the panic, see the darkness in broad daylight, and feel the tremors of the earth. Gaius Julius Polybius, Eumacia, Pliny, they are not figures from a history book. They were people of flesh and blood, with hopes, worries, and a life that took an abrupt and final turn on a single day. Thus, Pompeii is the city that died in a single day to live forever. Its immortality lies not in the grandeur of its temples, but in the intimacy of its details. It lives on in every stone worn smooth by thousands of sandals. It lives in every inscription on a wall, be it a quote from Virgil, a fleeting declaration of love, or a crude score settling in a tavern. It lives in the casts of those who could not escape. These silent, gray forms are not macabre exhibits. They are the final echo of a human moment, a three-dimensional testament to the instant when life gave way to time. They show us a mother protectively embracing her child, a man hiding his face in his hands, a dog writhing in its final convulsions. They preserve humanity in its most vulnerable form, reminding us that behind the great historical catastrophe lie countless individual fates. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine one of these streets at dusk. The last rays of the Italian sun bathe the ochre walls in a warm, soft light. The shadows grow long, tracing the contours of the deserted houses. It is quiet. Only a gentle wind rustles through the cypresses at the edge of the excavation site. The dust of the day has settled, and if you look at the basalt pavement, you can see them very clearly. Two deep, parallel ruts that run through the entire city. They are the tracks of wagon wheels. Thousands of carts, heavily laden with amphorae of wine and oil, with goods from the port or building materials for a new villa, have carved their way into the hard stone here over centuries. Every single one of these tracks is the record of a journey, a daily trip, a moment of busy life. They are the scars of normality, frozen for eternity. In these stone furrows, the entire persistence of life seems to shine through, silent proof that here, right here, people lived, worked, and loved, day after day, until that very last day. These tracks no longer lead anywhere, and yet they tell of everything. They are the last, quiet greeting from a city that did not want to be forgotten. This brings our journey into the past to a close. If you enjoyed this story, you can find more narratives like it in our History and Civilizations playlist, where we also explore the secrets of the Library of Alexandria and other wonders of the ancient world. But now, the time for rest has come. Let the images of this ancient city slowly fade. Let the voices of the past fall silent, giving way to the gentle rhythm of your own breath. Perhaps you will dream of the quiet gardens of Pompeii, of the vibrant colors of the frescoes, or of the stone streets in the moonlight. Allow yourself to let go and sink into a deep, restful sleep, carried by the certainty that some stories never truly end.
That was today's night lesson. Thank you for listening. If you'd like to see more videos like this, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Good night and sleep well.